Farhana Sheikh, and this is AWANI Tonight. No cases of the new Omicron XE variant has been detected in Malaysia. And as an economic crisis unfolds in Sri Lanka, we explore lessons we can take away and mistakes to avoid. Stay tuned for more. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin confirmed that a new mutation of the Omicron variant XE has not yet been detected in Malaysia. He said so far the Omicron XE variant had only been reported in neighbouring Thailand.
Ada dua benda yang kita tengok dengan varian baru ini. Kebolehjangkitan dia dan keseriusan dia. Dua perkara. Kebolehjangkitan Omicron contohnya lagi tinggi daripada Delta sebab tu kes melambung naik. Tapi keseriusannya lebih sederhana daripada Delta. Sebab tu kita punya unit rawatan rapi pun tak penuh lagi macam dulu. So untuk varian baru ini kita kena tengok daripada negara lain sama ada kebolehjangkitan tinggi ataupun dia punya keseriusan dia tinggi. Barulah kita boleh ambil langkah-langkah yang sepatutnya.
The dispute between several companies related to the My Sejahtera app does not concern the government. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin assured the public that the data and information in the application will still belong to the ministry no matter what the court ruling will be. He reiterated that the data and information are safe and that the server of the data is based in Malaysia and not anywhere else. He stressed that the app remains important in serving various purposes, such as displaying the COVID-19 vaccination certificate and monitoring COVID-19 patients at home. On February 24th, a suit was filed by Hasrat Budi Sendirian Berhad, a shareholder of MySJ Sendirian Berhad, against Itomo Malaysia Sendirian Berhad, Revolusi Asia Sendirian Berhad, MySJ and 3 individuals in relation to a dispute over a shareholder agreement. The World Bank projects Malaysia's economy to grow 5.5% this year. According to its recent report, growth is driven by the reopening of borders, recovery in domestic demand and expansion in exports. However, the World Bank cautioned that growth could slow down to 4.8% if the Ukraine-Russia conflict worsens, aside from financial tightening in the US and structural slowdown in China. It also warned of possible supply chain disruptions and emergence of more severe COVID-19 variants. Meanwhile, the World Bank's East Asia and Pacific EAP Economic Update April 2022 reported that COVID-19, food inflation and floods would weigh down progress on the well-being of the poor and vulnerable. In 2021, the World Bank projected Malaysia's economy to grow 5.8% this year, compared to 3.1% the year before. Many businesses have voiced their concern about coping with the impact of the new 1,500 ringgit minimum wage due to be implemented in May. Associate Professor Dr. Hafizali Iqbal Hussain from Taylor's University says the hike will bring about more good than harm, as the hike is expected to improve labour productivity.
People or views coming from economists about the implementation of a higher minimum wage, and they think that, or the view is that it would harm people it was supposed to protect by imposing an artificial value. And the idea or the argument behind this view is that people with a lower skill or experience would tend to have lower productivity, and therefore, if you have a flaw, then they would be not hired in the first place.
Dr. Hafizali said improved labour productivity will help in bringing down unemployment.
The implementation of the previous minimum wage in Malaysia showed that there was an increase in labour productivity, given that people are now more motivated and there tends to be a lower turnover. Yeah. Okay. In fact, if you look at some long-term studies, there has been evidence that you're going to see reduction in unemployment and the participation in labour is going to increase. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to see, or what we have seen, is that there's also been evidence documented that the previous increase did not result in any reduction in labour demand. Yeah, so there wasn't any unemployment as a consequence of minimum wage. And in the Malaysian labour market, we know that there tends to be an efficiency wage relationship. If you increase the cost, in this case is the wages, if you pay higher wages, there is a tendency for us to obtain greater productivity. Yeah? So whatever potential prices or cost increase can be countered and offset by the increase in productivity. So it seems as a whole, if you look at it on the overall picture, I'm leaning towards a more positive impact coming about from this increase in minimum wage.
While there will be adjustment for businesses to adapt to the minimum wage in the beginning, Dr. Hafizali is of the view that the hike will positively impact businesses in the long run.
What businesses can expect is that we're going to get greater levels of employees staying on the same job, and as they go through the learning curve, they're going to adapt and become more efficient at what they do. And this is going to save businesses in the long run rather than having to rehire. Rehire has got cost itself. If people leave the jobs because they get paid slightly better somewhere else, then you're going to have a tight labor market, and you're going to see some sort of a shortage, and you might want to rethink those kind of things. Yeah, and then you might have to retrain some of your employees, and you're going to have to you can save on all this cost because people will feel that they are more well paid and they're likely to stay at the same job a lot longer, and this is going to work out in that sense. Yeah.
We'll continue after this break. Stay with us.
Bahmun semua padian, lihatlah Awani Borneo jam 7 malam setiap hari, banyak berita-berita cerita kita ni hanya di Astro Awani.
Ledakan teknologi komunikasi ini turut mendedahkan rakyat terhadap ancaman cyber.
Lihat hackers semakin berani melakukan ancaman tanpa berselindung. Ya.
Istilah payung emas merupakan satu hadis palsu.
Tiada paksaan, ibu bapa akan diberi maklumat keberkesanan vaksin COVID-19 kepada kanak-kanak.
The pandemic has underscored a need for a proper collection and disposal system dedicated for hazardous waste.
The much-awaited border reopening, also scheduled on the same date of April 1st.
Now the pandemic has underscored the need for businesses to not only digitize workflows, but move them to cloud.
Welcome back. Sri Lanka President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's ruling coalition lost its majority in parliament today. At least 41 lawmakers walked out of the alliance amid growing unrest in the country over an economic and foreign exchange crisis. The president earlier called on opposition parties to help him form a national government and accept cabinet portfolios, but they have all refused and reiterated demands for him to resign. A freshly appointed finance minister also announced he was quitting the job less than 24 hours after accepting the post. Every member of the Sri Lanka's cabinet except the president and his elder brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, had resigned late Sunday. Meanwhile, prices of daily necessities surged in Sri Lanka's largest city, Colombo, and surrounding areas in the midst of a national curfew. The debt-laden country is struggling to pay for imports of fuel and other goods due to a scarcity of foreign exchange, leading to hours-long power cuts and a shortage of essentials in the country's worst economic crisis since its independence in 1948. Therefore, what other lessons can we take from the economic crisis unfolding in Sri Lanka? Dr. Rahul Mishra from Asia-Europe Institute UM shared with us his insights.
There are a number of lessons. First and foremost, please don't get indulged into any kind of economic mismanagement. Malaysian economy and Sri Lankan economy are not point to point, but overall, they're very similar in the sense that both of them depend on tourism a lot. Both these countries are also dependent on a high volume of international trade. They are also dependent on trade and partnership with the major neighbors like India and China. In case of Malaysia, it is more with ASEAN countries, but China is a prominent partner there. So how you trade and what kind of investments you seek, what kind of projects you seek with other bigger economies is something that has to be taken care of. Another problem with countries like Sri Lanka and perhaps Malaysia as well is the populist policies. Government, I think, governments across this region have to learn that populist policies that are detrimental to economic structure, economic architecture of their respective countries is something that they must avoid. Just because you are trying to win an election doesn't mean that you offer these tax cuts like Rajapaksa did in 2019, or those incentives that are not sustainable. So those kind of freebies have to be avoided.
We also asked Dr. Rahul on how best to avoid mismanagement in the country. He said having a long-term economic vision in place should be the main priority for all.
Keep your national economic health sound and don't tweak with it too much. I would suggest that there should be as little political interference as possible. It should be in the hands of politicians who know economics or economists who know politics. They should be the responsible people, should be at the center stage. And these policies should also be drafted keeping the long-term perspective in mind. So in case of Sri Lanka, what happened was you are moving from one election to another election. So one election to another election is like, it could be 2 months, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years, 4 years in case of Sri Lanka, and that's not a good thing. So a long-term economic vision has to be in place. But I would count populist measure as the most difficult challenge at this time. In Malaysia, there is a political instability phase at this moment, and we see that there is this very natural this goal that politicians have that they should be in power or they should be back to power, and this political rivalry and competition should not sideline economic sensibilities and good economic management of the country.
As Sri Lanka's economic crisis, public discontent and political turmoil continue to spiral out of control, what can pull it back from the brink? Tonight on Consider This, we speak to our guests about Sri Lanka's options to stem the worsening crisis. Meanwhile, Japan flew 20 Ukrainian refugees into Tokyo on a special flight today. The effort was seen as a show of support to help Ukraine amid the Russian invasion by a country long been reluctant to take in foreigners. The 20, aged between 6 and 66, including 15 women, aren't the first Ukrainian refugees to arrive in Japan since the Russian invasion on February 24th. However, they are the first group to be flown in on a special government plane arranged by Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi. The refugees who came in from Poland are expected to stay in Japan for at least 6 months, with Japan pledging to provide further support if needed. The group joins nearly 400 other Ukrainian refugees who previously arrived on their own since the Russian invasion. The country has an extremely strict refugee policy and has been reluctant to fully accept migrant workers, making its offer to accept Ukrainians unusual. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo imposed a curfew in the capital Lima today, banning people from leaving their homes in an attempt to curb protests against rising fuel and fertilizer costs. A wave of protests has spread across the country amid rising prices triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Protests continued into the second week yesterday. According to officials, at least 4 people have been killed in the protest. Over the weekend, the government has proposed to drop most taxes on fuel in an attempt to lower prices, while also raising the minimum wage by about 10%. Peru was already battling high inflation before the war, but in March, inflation hit a 26-year high, largely driven by rising fuel and food prices. That is all we have for you tonight. I'm Farhana Sheikh. We'll see you again.